This year, as in 2014 when I chose the TMEA Etudes, at that time, the snare drum etude comes from the Solo Snare Drummer book by Vic Firth. And like 2014, this etude is based off of a well-known snare drum excerpt used in many orchestral auditions. Etude number 10 is based off the fourth movement from William Schumann's Third Symphony. The most important aspect to consider with the snare drum etude is always play with a great sound quality. Don't overplay the instrument with harsh downstrokes when you play those louder dynamics. Secondly, and although quite obviously, learn to play the correct rhythms at a steady tempo. Practice slow at first to develop those good habits with accurate execution. At the beginning, there should be a very clear delineation between the dotted 8th, 16th note figures and the triplets. There should not be a swing feel to the dotted 8th, 16th note figures. So let me demonstrate the opening here. As stated in the notes of the top of the page, pay close attention to the quarter note triplet figures in measures 33 to 44. If counting in a 6/4 meter, every quarter note triplet will receive one beat, and then you can subdivide the eighths and the eighth note triplets correctly. Refine your stickings and then write them in. This will ingrain consistency with your practice sessions. And then repeat short phrases to ingrain these positive habits. Like every other piece, repetition is key, repetition is key, repetition is key. With this etude, dynamics and playing areas are really important because there's so much of a wide range of dynamics. This piece is so interesting with that dynamic contrast. So strive for consistency in a wide contrast throughout the entire piece. Every pianissimo should sound the same, and there should be a clear difference between forte and fortissimo for measures 33 through 36, and then into measure 37. This is what will make a huge difference in your performance. Go for every minute detail. The dynamics also help us to see that the peak of the etude occurs in measure 37. Play with a full sound, but again, don't overplay the drum. Let the sticks rebound and listen to the sound quality of the instrument so you retain the true characteristic drum sound. You will maintain this legato flow of the etude by allowing the sticks to rebound off the head. In regards to playing areas on a concert snare drum, I usually aim for just off-center when the dynamics are mezzo forte and above. This gives me a full resonant sound. When I play directly in the center, I'm going to get a really staccato sound, and that isn't required for this etude. When playing the soft sections, I choose to play just off of the edge, but not so close that I get a thin sound. Again, I'm using my ear to help me decide how close, how far away from the edge I should play. The drum is in tune, has a good snare tension, you should be able to hear every stroke clearly at all the dynamics. So let me give you a couple practice tips to playing soft. First, play soft all the time. I know this sounds very simple, but it's true. We don't do this enough. But for this piece, when you learn how to play soft with all kinds of different warm-ups, your hands are going to develop those chops to be able to play the etude. Secondly, play your warm-ups at pianissimo. Use any of your drumline warm-ups as a great starting point. Play them all at a soft dynamic on a concert snare drum. Lastly, play the entire piece at pianissimo. Ignore the written dynamics and just play softly. This will train your muscles to play with a good control at these softer dynamics. Details will make a huge difference in your overall performance. The clarity of the embellishments is really important. I aim for only 2 notes on the drags, so there's a difference between those notes and the short and separated quarter note rolls throughout the piece as well, which I aim for a buzz quality for those short quarter note rolls. Mark the phrases to allow the piece to breathe. Changes in the dynamics usually mark those different phrases, so be sure to anticipate those changes. Also, another practice method, practice with your hands separate, especially some of the more intricate passages, measures 99 and through 20, and also measures 25 through 33. For the rolls, make note that most of the rolls are not connected to a release note. When this occurs, end the roll with a short buzz to create a short space before that next stroke. And also make note that there's one errata change to connect the release note into measure 33. To me, I felt like that allowed that end of the phrase into those quarter note triplets to make more sense. There are a few different approaches for the roll check patterns because of the wide dynamic range executed in a very short time frame, specifically in measures 25 through 32. You can attempt to keep the check pattern rhythm the same throughout. This can be triplets, eighth note triplets, fivelets, or eighth notes. I prefer to play these roll check patterns based on the dynamics of if it's louder, I'm going to play a little bit faster check pattern, and if the rolls are softer, I'm going to play a little bit slower check pattern. So for the 3 loud rolls that don't change dynamics, measures 22 and 40, I play with the eighth note triplet check pattern. That's going to allow that to drive and to create more volume out of the drum. However, when the dynamics do change suddenly, I actually use a 5-lit for the roll that crescendos and eighth notes for the rolls that decrescendo. This allows for a smooth sound as I get softer, but also gives me direction for the rolls as I get louder. I also marked my music to make sure I know what rolls are 5s, eighth notes, and those sextuplets. So let me demonstrate the check pattern, measures 31 through 33. I'm going to do that without the snares and a little bit slower tempo. So when I have this check pattern, it allows me to control and exaggerate the contrast of those dynamics. For the pulse, finally, I recommend using metronome games with this etude. Put the click on just beat 1 or just beat 2 if we're thinking in cut time. Maybe just the upbeats if we're thinking in cut time also, or even maybe every third beat, or maybe every downbeat, every 2 measures. As you put more space between the metronome clicks, you can now use the metronome as checkpoint to check your timing instead of having it like a teacher telling you exactly when you play. That allows you to develop that internal sense of pulse, so when you take the metronome away, you've developed that pulse to allow you to perform at a really high level. I love this etude, short and sweet, but there's a lot packed into it. Have fun with it, enjoy it, and good luck on all of your audition processes. The two mallet selection this year comes from pages 22 through 23 from the book Masterpieces for Marimba, compiled and arranged by Thomas McMillan. The most important aspect to consider with the two mallet etude is to always play with a great sound quality. Don't overplay the instrument with harsh downstrokes. This piece in particular is from the Baroque era, which usually means you're going to play with a lighter style and forward motion. This year's selection is a transcription of the second movement, or the Allegro, from Handel's Sonata for Violin in E major, and you could find it with HWV 373. This etude requires fluid hands, spot-on accuracy, and the ability to always know what's coming up next. If you aren't thinking ahead and using stiff motions, your sound quality and note accuracy will suffer. As a general process to prepare this etude, learn to play the correct notes at a steady tempo. Practice slow at first to develop good habits and accurate execution. Play the etude with short phrases to perform exact notes and rhythms, and establishing the correct stickings as well. Repeat these short phrases to ingrain positive habits, because repetition is key, repetition is key, repetition is key. Regarding stickings, first experiment with the suggested stickings that are in the music. Then try some other options to see what might work best. Personally, I followed most of the written stickings, but did change a few. Generally, I tried to avoid playing double strokes unless absolutely necessary. This meant that I played several sections with left-hand lead, even though I'm right-handed. And then playing passages with alternating hands allowed me to have an even sound across the board. Because I chose to alternate hands for a majority of the piece, I did have to adjust and move my body a little bit to have good hand placement and get the mallets out of the way with my stroke types. There are times when you see me rotate my shoulders and my hips to get a mallet out of the way for better stroke types. Let me show you a small little snippet of this. It measures 49 to 52. You'll notice that I shifted to my right to allow my right hand to get out of the way so my left hand could move fluidly to get a great sound. So there's times where my right hand gets out of the way, and there's times where my left hand gets out of the way. And it's all to help me give great accuracy and great sounds. Once you decide on a particular sticking, write it in your music. Always mark your stickings to develop a kinesthetic awareness of the piece and consistency in your practicing. And if you need to change a few stickings as you speed up the tempo, do so, and then again, change it in the music. Another great learning tool for this piece is to label the chord progressions. While learning and practicing this piece, I label chord progressions throughout to help me anticipate the next measure, statement, or gesture. For example, at letter A, the chords move from what we call a 5-7 chord, or B dominant 7 chord is another way you can say it. It resolves to the 1 chord, or E major. It's what the key of this piece is. More specifically, I know what the notes are of that 5-7 chord. I know that it's a B, D sharp, F sharp, and A. And the notes in the 1 chord, or the E chord, are an E, G sharp, and B. This helps me to see those specific notes pop out, and then it shows me the general shape of each measure. Much of this piece utilizes scales, chords, and arpeggios, so take advantage of these patterns and simple chord progressions to make the learning process easier. You'll start to notice these longer phrases as you play the piece. So what's great about it is you won't be thinking note to note, but rather chord to chord or measure to measure, and then bigger picture, phrase to phrase. Speaking about phrasing, every year during the all-state process, there's so many wonderful discussions, maybe lively discussions, about tempos, interpretations, and subjective musical decisions. I love this part of the audition process because students and directors can infuse their own ideas into the music. For my musical decision process, I listened to recordings of the original violin and continuo piece. So violin or piano were quite a few of the recordings. I was able to identify peak moments, arrival points, small moments that rise and fall with the shape, notes to stress, unstress, and I developed a sound in my ear to recreate a graceful flow compared to the original version. Overall, the musical nuances are key for the next level of your preparation. I encourage you, however, before we get to that point, create a amazing solid foundation of note accuracy, dynamic contrast, and great sounds before you take these next steps of adding these musical additions to the piece. So here are a few steps to consider regarding the phrasing. First, prepare your hands and internal pulse to play in time with no fluctuations to start off with. Play with various metronome games to develop this steady time and pulse. Then, when you add various articulations, gestures, and musicality, think about the longer phrases and try to avoid making sudden or drastic changes that could negatively affect the sense of pulse and flow. Rolls and trills for this piece. The rolls should be carefully executed to not overplay the release notes especially. The purpose of the rolls is to merely sustain these notes, again, to sound closer to the original violin part. In most of these violin recordings, the release notes don't have a sharp attack sound. Make note also that there's an errata that extends 2 rolls on page 1, which I feel more closely match the violin articulations. The 2 trills at the bottom of each page are merely coloring the written pitch. Once again, don't overplay these notes. Specifically in measure 64, I've heard several different interpretations, so I've chosen to play what we call a mordant figure, which is merely 3 notes. But some, if you want to, you can choose to play more notes than that and connect it to beat 1 in measure 65. I chose the mordant figure, and this is kind of what it sounds like. So I play those 3 notes just to color that written D. Also with these trills, make sure you start the diatonic note above the written pitch in the music. So here are 3 additional tips for this piece. I chose the innovative Percussion IP 514 to highlight the lightness of the style and clarity of the 16ths at all dynamics. These mallets allow me to exaggerate the contrast between those loud and soft dynamics. Practice sections with hands separately. I love this aspect. I love this practice method. This will train your hands to know and anticipate some of the fast and somewhat potentially awkward motions around the instrument. This was very helpful for me at letter A and measures 40 to 44 to train my hands to know exactly where and when to move for the chord changes. And then overall, continue practicing your fundamentals, scales, intervals, arpeggios. Develop your chops so you can have consistent hand-to-hand motions and comfortability moving around the board. It's a great etude. I really like how it complements the 4-mallet etude. So good luck. Have a great time with this etude and enjoy performing, preparing, and working this piece up for your auditions. The 4-mallet etude is called Jonathan's Light and is from Julie Davila's book, Impressions on Wood, published by Roloff Productions. Julie Davila is currently the president of the Percussive Art Society and a member of the WGI Hall of Fame. Overall, this piece really complements the 2-mallet etude due to its graceful nature, legato lines, and flowing melodies. Although the tempos for the all-state process are slightly faster than originally marked, the piece should not feel rushed, as this takes away from the overall gentleness style of the piece. With this etude, in every piece of music you play, focus on getting great sounds by working on your technique and approach to the instrument to create fluid motions, and again, avoid harsh strokes. Stopping the mallets immediately after striking the instrument can create staccato sounds, which is not what this piece specifically requires. Use your ears to listen for the correct sound, as this is one of the most important aspects about this etude and all solo literature you perform. Since this piece has the most expressive nature of all 4 etudes this year, I chose a medium soft mallet that allowed me to bring out the legato lines, but that also can play a wide dynamic range that's required in this etude. For this piece, I chose the Ludwig Albert series from Innovative Percussion with the 3105s in mallets 2, 3, and 4, and then one softer, the 3104 in mallet 1 position. So body positioning is really important for this etude. The piece uses the accidentals and the naturals simultaneously throughout, and at times can create some difficult hand positions unless you understand how to move your body and your feet to alleviate some of these issues. You don't want to contort your hands in awkward positions because, again, that's going to create bad sounds. Work out your feet placement and body position so the hand technique and stroke type doesn't suffer. When playing the F minor chord and that E flat inversion chord in measures 1 and 2 respectively, move your feet and hips to the right. This allows for that left hand to be more parallel with the forearm and not bent backwards like this. The vertical motion of the mallets should stay fluid, so you can use your body position and feet placement to help maintain that consistent stroke type and technique in your hands that allow you to play with full and rich sounds. For stickings, in 4-mallet literature, many composers, Julie Davila does this as well, they write in sticking suggestions for some difficult sections. This can be very helpful, but understand that you aren't required to play these stickings. I recommend experimenting with the written suggestions, but then trying some other options as well. In this piece, there are several options for some of these more difficult, harder passages. Once you figure out your sticking, for all keyboard music that you play, snare drum and timpani even, mark the stickings in your music. This will ensure consistency between your practice sessions. When I look at the stickings that are written in, I look at that, I try that first, but then, you know what? I actually try several different options. I ended up trying about 4 to 5 different patterns for measure 8, as well as the section right there from 29 to 31. For the repeating patterns starting in measure 8, you will notice in the performance video that I use 2 double lateral strokes and bring the left hand up onto beat 3. This allows me to stay fluid and get a very clear, even 16th note rhythm. It also helps me to set up to play the lower note in measure 9 with mallet 1 as I move down the line with those 16ths. That allows me to comfortably lead back into those double lateral stroke types. I suggest practicing this section without the double lateral motion so you feel where your hand should move, so play it with double verticals first. So let me show you a couple different things about this section. So when I play those double laterals, then I'm allowed to bring mallet 2 up to that G. Then after that, I play with mallet 1 and then mallet 3. As you notice, that sets my hands up for that double lateral motion right after that. In measures 29 and 30, I actually don't use the recommended stickings that Julie puts in the book. I didn't want to play double laterals between the naturals and the accidentals, and I also wanted to avoid having to play any triple laterals. So I changed the sticking in measure 31 also to interlocking single alternating strokes, which allowed the transition into the repeat to move much more smoothly so I could control the diminuendo. So let me just show you that real quick. So generally, my sticking choices always lead me somewhere in a natural and comfortable motion. So the 4 mallet fundamentals, all 4 of the main 4 mallet fundamentals are used in this piece. The single independent stroke is when one mallet plays independently of all the others. That happens in the first 4 bars or so. I'll demonstrate that real quick. So that right hand plays those single independent strokes. The double vertical stroke is when 2 mallets play exactly at the same time in that same hand. In measure 24, you're going to play a lot of double verticals. So you want to try to make sure all 4 notes play at exactly the same time. I mentioned the double lateral stroke. That utilizes one forearm motion and then a forearm rotation to get 2 notes played right after one another. It's the double lateral stroke. And then single alternating strokes. I just mentioned that as well. That's when one hand alternates between the 2 mallets, usually at a little bit slower tempo. And this is a great moment in measure 31 where I've chosen to use interlocking single alternating strokes. That allows me to move fluidly around the instrument. So I highly recommend labeling these stroke types in your music, and then developing your technique and building your chops to have complete control of these fundamentals. There are times in this etude where these fundamentals are isolated, while other times you play 2 different stroke types at the same time. For combination strokes, a great practice method is to play one hand at a time, isolate them, and then put them together. For example, in measures 1 through 5, you play double vertical strokes in the left hand, single independent strokes with the right hand, all at the same time. Isolate those hands and then combine them. Find some other instances in this piece where you use these combination strokes and use this practice method for those sections as well. It's a great piece that works so many different things with your hands, and then around the instrument, always focus on the sound quality. Think about the melody, allowing that balance to come out, but again, think about your stroke types, develop your chops, and have just a great time with this really wonderful etude by Julie Davila. Thanks. The timpani selection this year is Etude number 11 from the book Studies in Copper. This etude challenges performers with rapid motions around the drums, a wide range of dynamics, mixed meters, 3 tuning changes, and more. So when we think about the sound quality and stroke types, you want to develop a strong foundation of these stroke types to play with great sounds at all dynamics. To achieve a full tone at louder dynamics, you want to avoid playing downstrokes. When you grip the mallets too much pressure and play with a harsh downstroke, you're going to get a harsh sound. Work on allowing the mallets to rebound off the head or have quick upstrokes to get the mallet heads off of the drum heads as quickly as possible. This will create a full tone out of each drum. So let me demonstrate a little bit of the beginning with good and then bad sounds. Then here's bad sounds with some harsh downstrokes. You'll see and hear a very clear difference. When playing the softer and faster passages in measures 59 to 68, I recommend keep the hands low to the drums and shift really quickly for those sextuplets. You'll notice I also play a double at the end of measure 59 to allow the left hand to come over to that C, again, for sound quality and motion. I actually chose a little slightly harder mallet for this section, and I keep that mallet for the last section to allow the mallets to do the work for me and assist me with clear articulations. For rhythms, generally, the rhythms aren't overly complicated for this etude. So because of this, rhythmic interpretation and a steady pulse will be extremely important. There should be a very clear difference between the 16ths, the triplets, and the 16th triplet passages. To accomplish this, I recommend developing your inner pulse through various metronome games. Programming a preset with the meter changes will help you feel, hear, count, and maintain a steady pulse using the Tonal Energy app. And then you can also play with just a regular metronome. So in the first half of the etude, put the metronome on just the upbeats. You would then need to restart the metronome in measure 51 because it gets off just a little bit. It gets off of a half a beat. Another metronome game, put the met on the half note, either beat 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. So basically the concept is when you have more space between the clicks of the metronome, this helps you develop your internal sense of pulse. I would also suggest playing all the rhythms with correct stickings on one drum or play them on a practice pad to ensure proper timing before moving around the drums. Let's talk about stickings, especially in measures 59 to 68. There are times where you need to play double strokes. This will allow you to keep the hands and the mallets low to the drums, again, while also setting yourself up for smooth, preparatory motions to make sure you're moving from one drum to the next. And the double strokes allows you to prepare that next hand for where it needs to play. With double strokes, the primary aspect to consider is to ensure you are still playing in consistent playing areas and are achieving a consistent sound on all the drums. We talk about sound quality, so incredibly important. Use your ears when you start to play those doubles. Focus on the heights. So each double stroke is even and clear, and again, consistent. Use video and audio analysis to provide instant feedback to help you make any needed adjustments. So when we look at one little spot, measure 62 to 63, this is where we're going to use some double strokes. So pardon the wrong pitches, but this is kind of what we're going to be thinking about. To set, we're going to do a double on the top two drums to set me up for that beat 3, and then And then we play the doubles at the end of measure 63 to allow our hands to flow and again to get a good consistent sound. Several other sections use those double strokes, whether in this section, measures 40, 41, 42. I also play some double strokes again to prepare my hands to go from one drum to the next with smooth motions. A good way to practice these motions is to work your hands separately. This allows you to focus on the breakdown of these specific motions around the drums. So for dampening, since most of this piece goes by really quickly and there's not really a whole lot of rest, there are really only a few places that allow dampening to occur. For this piece, and really every timpani solo or band part or percussion ensemble piece you play, I suggest dampening in parts to bring out the phrases and add clarity to rhythms and important lines. Specifically for this etude, I chose to dampen the rests in measures 29 through 30, also in measure 45 to bring clarity to the decrescendo, and at the end to bring clarity to the primary note of D, that I actually muffle the G right when I play that last note. I also dampen drums on exact beats right before tuning changes. Technically, work to have your hand dampen the drum in the playing area and not make any noise. So sometimes it's kind of hard to do that. You might hear a little bit, but just continue to strive for that. I use the padding of the back 3 fingers and sometimes my thumb to cancel out the sound. So a couple things that you can be aware of when dampening. Make sure that after you dampen out a drum, that you bring the stick back to the correct playing position, especially when we play the triplets in measures 29 and 30. I play the 3 notes, bum, 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 and then I let that stick rebound, and then I dampen, something like this. Again, I'm thinking about the 3 notes of the triplet to have a great sound, and then I reset my hand very quickly to dampen that note out. So don't let the mallet head end up too close to the center of the head either. So you want to make sure your playing area is always consistent. So when we're thinking about dampening, always thinking about the sound right before you dampen. So you always strive for full, rich sounds on every stroke. With tuning changes, there's 3 tuning changes in this etude. And so with all of these timpani tuning changes, I'm very meticulous about the beats that I change the pitches. For this etude, I start every tuning change on beat 1 and arrive at the new pitch on beat 3. This allows my work with all of the halftime metronome games on 1 and 3 or 2 and 4 to develop my internal sense of pulse, to then make these tuning changes in time and in tempo. I also work out the order of the drum tunings to help set up the next entrance or start tuning the drum I just finished playing. I do everything in a very specific order to make sure that I have that consistency from practice session to practice session that will then help me in the performance. Also, I mark my music. Absolutely. Mark your music with the stickings, mark your music with the tuning changes, so again, you can practice this consistency. For mallet choice, as you noticed in my videos, I actually changed mallets in measures 51 to 58. I did this to use a slightly more articulate mallet for the last 2 sections of the piece. These 2 sections require a little more articulation at the softer dynamic, so using this harder mallet allows the mallets to do more of the work for me without sounding too harsh. So I chose the innovative percussion models. For the first 2 sections, I used the BT6 model. And then for the last 2 sections, I used the JMG5 model. These allow me to get a great sound on the drums and allow the mallets to do more of the work for you. Enjoy this piece, practice hard, mark your parts, record yourself, and think about having consistency, and above all else, have great sounds around the drums. Good luck and have fun.